All right, we're happy to welcome you to today's webinar, From Data to Decisions: How to Present Conjoint Results that Inspire Action and Build Trust. We're very excited to hear from Megan Peitz from Numerious. Before we dive in, I just have a couple things to share and talk about. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. My name is Brian McEwen. I am one of the product managers here at Sawtooth. We are a do-it-yourself survey platform, well known for our specialty extensions in the world of choice modeling with conjoint analysis and MaxDiff. If you're new to this world, you can try us out for free. Discover.sawtooth.com. We'd love to have you take things for a spin and give us any feedback. This webinar, like all of our webinars, is going to be posted onto our website. Our website has just a ton of information, webinars like this, white papers, a forum for discussions, tons of great resources, all for free. We want to give you a quick update on some upcoming events. Next month, we're going to be having a webinar by Tim Smith on pricing, market research, and new product development. Should be a good time. Towards the end of September, we're going to be in Nuremberg, Germany for an in-person event, a preference modeling event that has various beginner and expert tracks on it. We're going to be in San Francisco in October doing an applied workshop on conjoint analysis and MaxDiff with a focus on quantitative UX research. And then right now we are in our call for papers for next year in May. We're going to be in Berlin, Germany for the annual Sawtooth Research Conference. If you are interested in a proposal for a paper, you can send an email to brian@sawtooth.com. For all these things and upcoming events, you can always check us out at sawtooth.com/events. For our webinar today, we'd like you to use the Q&A section. We'll be monitoring that, either answering some in the moment or saving some things for Megan to talk about at the end. And a recording of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who registered. Now, I am delighted to introduce our speaker today, Megan Peitz. She's the founder and CEO of Numerious. She received her master's in mathematics and statistics and has been doing this stuff for a little while. A lot of years doing conjoint MaxDiff segmentation, new product research. She's been published in the Journal of Choice Modeling. And if you've ever come to the Sawtooth Research Conference, you'll recognize her because she has a history of winning Best Paper Awards for some of the new and interesting boundary pushing research that Megan does in this area. So we are thrilled to learn from stories from the trenches and all the tips and tricks and things that she's learned over the years. And so, Megan, we will turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Brian. I'm glad you said over little years and didn't stress my age. Let me start sharing my screen and you let me know if you can see it.
Yep, looks great.
Good to go. Great. All right. Before I jump in, if you want to follow along in the deck or just have it for the future, go ahead and take a screenshot or, I don't know, use your phone, take a picture of that QR code, put in your info, and you'll be able to see the slides that are here today to inspire action and build trust with your conjoint results. So Brian gave me a great introduction, so I won't spend too much time here, but my company is called Numerious. It's a mashup of the words numerically curious. And if you're an uber nerd like myself, you may notice that in some of the numbers in our backdrop is a pattern. Each of these 4 lines represent a very important mathematical number. That is how nerdy I am. But why am I here today? Well, at Numerious, we get to run hundreds of conjoints a year for some of the world's biggest brands and the most innovative startups. And these are some of those brands. And so you can imagine that after 6 years of being in the room, well, virtually in the room, with product planners, product managers, and C-suite executives, I've learned some key lessons in what works and what doesn't when it comes to presenting conjoint results. And that's why I'm here today, because I love this methodology so much, and I want every single person who runs a conjoint or commissions a conjoint to realize the value in the data. Because as a research vendor myself, I have been in your shoes, right? So many of you on this webinar are probably responsible for the actual analytics involved in a conjoint. So I might be speaking directly to you when I talk about a time when you built a beautiful design, spent hours cleaning the data thoroughly, getting a model that's extremely predictive of your fixed tasks, and creating a beautiful simulator tool that calculates share and revenue and has all the checks boxes and the filters. But after presenting the results in the report, you see that blank stare on people's faces in the room. And you can tell that they don't really know what to do next. Or maybe you're an insights lead at a big brand and you're frustrated because you've spent over 6 figures on a conjoint project in the past, hoping for that clear guidance on how to prioritize your product roadmap or choose a price point, only to feel a little lost in the deck that shows maybe utility scores and is full of charts and stats, but no clear direction. So you're left holding this bill for a really expensive piece of research and nothing that you feel super proud to take to your stakeholder. Even worse, you may avoid running a conjoint in the future because of this experience. So I can't see the chat, but if this is resonating, feel free to put a +1 in there, or if you've been in this situation before. Because at the end of the day, I don't mean to sound doom and gloom, right? But the hard truth is that the best data means nothing if it doesn't inspire action. So I'll repeat that again. The best data means nothing if it doesn't inspire action. And in my opinion, most conjoint results aren't failing from bad models, but they're failing from misalignment and bad storytelling. And what's at stake with that? Well, you're going to lose the trust of your stakeholders. You're going to lose the momentum you had for that product or service. And you're going to have dust collecting on your decks and no repeat customers, right? But we are going to fix this today. I'm going to walk you through the framework that we use at Numerious to go from data to decision making. And if you joined us a bit late, you can actually capture the QR code on the next screen and you'll be able to see the entire deck and the framework. So let's unveil the framework. Our framework has 5 main pillars to making a great conjoint deck: align, translate, simulate, visualize, and activate. And I'm going to give you all the tips and tricks through each of these phases. And if you can follow this framework on your next project, I guarantee it will be so easy to deliver a presentation that's going to drive confident decisions. So let's start with the first pillar. First up is alignment. Now, I know we're talking about presenting conjoint results, and yes, this piece of the framework is in reference to in your slide deck, but you'll be more successful if you've spent the time upfront in the project scoping phase, getting alignment on which decision the research is helping make, or what the stakes are if you get that decision wrong, and what success will look like at the end of the research. A good piece of research will make sure that we have this alignment up front and continue to remind the client of those main objectives throughout the survey design, throughout the creation of your attributes and levels, throughout the entire process, all the way up until sharing the final results, so that you know what you're going to give them and they know what they're going to get. And so every good deck at Numerious is going to start with a slide on, we did this research to X, right? Maybe that X is justify raising our prices by $5, or validate that we should launch SKU B instead of SKU C alongside our current SKU A, okay? So if you're the analyst and you're unsure on the why behind the conjoint, then you need to make sure you get to the heart of the matter, because you don't want to give your boss or your stakeholder something that they can't take action on or doesn't answer that why. Because if someone just says, we need to understand which features customers care about, well, there are multiple methodologies that could suit that business objective, right? And Conjoint might actually not be the best fit, but we're not here to talk about that. We've already decided that Conjoint is the best fit. So you need to double down on what they mean by which features customers care about, right? What is their why? Is it for feature prioritization? Is it for messaging? Is it for the go-to-market strategy? Are we trying to optimize the features for share, for revenue, or for both of those things, right? Because without that clear decision path, we might end up making recommendations that are irrelevant, right? Hey, price your product at $99. And then the CEO in the room says, $99, we can't even make it for $99. You have to charge at least $129, right? And then the rest of the meeting is basically worthless because now they've already tuned out, right? So you need to have a deck with results that people are going to know what to do with them. Another big alignment miss that I've seen is stakeholders trying to answer too many objectives in one study. Now, I get it. You're paying for people to take your survey, so why not squeeze in as much information out of those survey takers as possible? But if we don't prioritize our objectives, we could end up with so much data that it's hard to tell a story. Or a conjoint with so many attributes that there's little variability in the preferences and no clear signal on what to do next with your product or service. Now, I'm not harping on conjoints with lots of attributes and levels because, as Brian mentioned, we've won Best Paper a couple of times on running conjoints with lots of attributes and levels. So we feel very comfortable testing large attribute sets if we have a clear path for the decision that needs to be made with the data. In this case, we'll design something that can handle that large attribute set. But the difference is I'm going to ask enough questions to try to uncover if it feels like my client is throwing everything in the kitchen sink in because they don't have the confidence to push back on their stakeholders, right? So then I'm going to arm them with reasons why maybe we want to condense the list of attributes and levels and really try and help them prioritize the decision that they need to make with this data today, right? Are we trying to get insight for the 2027 product launch? Or do we really just need to get crystal clear on our pricing strategy for the upcoming refresh, right? That can really help you delineate or cut off any of those 2027 features from your conjoint that you're trying to run to inform the 2026 pricing strategy, okay? So having this kind of strategic conversation not only makes you look good as a partner, but also helps the client better articulate their goals and their strategies. And it gets you that alignment that you're gonna need come reporting time. So some good prompts for getting alignment early are asking your stakeholders, what decision will this inform? What are the options you're considering today? What would a good result look like to you? Who else needs to agree with this recommendation to get buy-in? And my personal favorite question is, what would you want to be able to say with confidence at the end of this project? Because then that's saying, let me help you, right? Let me help you look good so that you can stand in front of your boss or your execs or your board and say what you need to say with confidence. Yes, we can raise our prices, XYZ, this is why. Or, you know what? We need to go back to the drawing board because our plan isn't going to compete with competitors A, B, and C, right? I want them to be able to stand up and be confident in what they're going to say with these results. And if we can get the stakeholder to articulate that business problem, then we can all be in alignment on what the conjoint needs to answer. So here are some examples of what you want to try and get out from your stakeholder. So you want them to say something like, well, we're deciding whether to raise the price from $49.99 to $54.99, and we don't know if we can justify it. Like, that shows that they're dealing with a tension around the decision to raise prices. And based on that one little hint, I'm probably going to create a fixed task in my conjoint with one alternative of their exact product at $49.99 and on the other screen at $54.99. So if all else fails, I got a quick frequency run that says how people will feel, right? Obviously, I'm going to use the conjoint to model the data and do lots of better things, but I'm going to do everything I can to be crystal clear on that decision to raise their price $5. Okay? Some other examples here, we need to pick 3 features for the premium tier that drive the most user value. So they know that their resource load is 3 features. They probably can't do more than that, right? And they want to give engineering or development like that clear signal on those 3 features to add to the roadmap. So our research better deliver which 3 it should be. Okay, so the more you can get crystal clear, the better report you'll design, and ultimately the better experiment you'll design as well. All right, so now that we've hopefully attained alignment on what it is we're trying to solve, the next step is to bridge that gap between the technical rigor of a conjoint and stakeholder comprehension. In my opinion, this is arguably the most important piece of the puzzle. And that's why I think it's imperative to avoid stats jargon and speak in the language of the business. Stakeholders don't care about utilities. They care about which features matter to their users. So speak in plain language and bring your attributes to life through the lens of the user or the buyer. So I don't want to call anybody out, but it wouldn't be a Megan presentation without, giving a little bit of slack to showing average utility scores. So in this slide here is what I think is a bad example. And it's really just a dump of the average utility scores that you get out of a statistical platform that runs conjoint models. You get more out of Sawtooth software, but of course this is one of those outputs that just comes kind of standard, right? And so you're looking at the average utilities for golf balls by 3 attributes: brand, performance, and price. And as brilliant as our stakeholders are, they don't know what utilities are. And you certainly don't want to spend precious minutes of your presentation explaining hierarchical Bayesian multinomial logistic regression. I can tell you that kills the room. And not to mention, there's so much room for wrong interpretation when you look at this chart. For example, if someone who is unfamiliar with the conjoint just picked up this one slide, they might think people love Magnum Force brand and they hate Longshot. But that isn't true, right? Utilities are typically placed on a zero-centered scale, so there's always going to be positives and there's always going to be negatives. That doesn't mean they love the positives and hate the negatives. It's just that the higher the value, the more preferred it is. Not to mention, these data are interval scaled. So you can't say that a utility score of a 47 is 3 times as good as the utility score of 15, okay? And one more gotcha, if I haven't made it clear enough that my personal favorite is not utility dumps, is that the utilities are rescaled within an attribute. So you also can't compare the 47 for 15 yards farther and say that that's better than being a Magnum Force or a High Flyer product, right? And okay, one more. Did I also mention that this has no competitive context? So if you only had this information, you would say, well, shoot, guess we're pricing at $4.99, right? But if every ball on the market was $4.99 and only drove 5 yards further than average, then you might actually be able to charge $10.99 for a ball that drives 15 yards farther, because you'd be the only one on the market who could claim that. But this chart here offers no prioritization, no impact, and no business relevance. If you can't tell, it gives me so much anxiety that my clients will misinterpret the true findings that I don't even put these in our report. They are nowhere to be found. Maybe in the appendix, and I'll show you how to report them if you're going to in a little bit, but don't put them in the main deck, okay? Also, don't put those standard importance scores in the main deck because they too can be misleading. They are literally derived from those utility scores that I just hated on and have no competitive context. So it can't answer the stakeholders' real question on what we should build. Now, in this example, it looks okay, right? The importance scores are generally similar. Price is most important, followed by performance and then brand. So we're probably not missing too much of the story. But what if you had the results that said price was the most important feature, right? 50% of the importance score, and your client is the cheapest in the market? That would be great, right? But then you go to simulate things in the market and you realize your client has the lowest share. And they say, but Megan, we're winning on price, the most important feature. Well, that's pretty conflicting, right? And I wouldn't blame them for not understanding, because what's not being captured here is that perhaps price is the most important based on the utilities, but perhaps that's because we tested a range of prices so ridiculously high that whenever anyone saw that one super high price point, nobody chose it, leading to a really large negative utility score and arbitrarily making the importance of price look super huge. But the only important thing about price is that you can't charge astronomical prices, right? So what we need is a way to transform these outputs into strategic insights, not just these abstract concepts. Because product leaders want to be able to say things like, customers are 2 times more likely to choose a product when it includes feature A. Dropping it would cut interest in half. That statement is concrete, relevant to the business, and stakeholders can act on it, right? Or something like, customers would require a $5 discount to accept a less customizable version of the product. That's financial language with a number that everyone in the room can understand and ties directly to product and pricing strategy. Or the last one, right? For our premium audience, adding feature B delivers more perceived value than a $10 price cut. This speaks to the trade-offs that consumers are going to make at shelf and shows how different groups of people value the product. So this is how your product leader thinks. Wouldn't it be ideal to actually give them a slide deck that talks like this? And the best and only way to do this is through simulations. So this is where the real magic happens with conjoint data. We simulate the business impact of different paths the organization could go. We do things like what happens if we raise price, or we show what we gain or lose when we do different options, okay? So let's take a look at what this might look like in practice. All right, let's assume that our client was planning to launch product B, but they didn't know whether they should replace product A with product B or keep it on the shelf with product A. Okay, so we are now aligned that we need our data to clearly show if product A should be replaced or kept on the shelf. With our conjoint results, we can very clearly simulate a scenario where product B replaces product A, and another scenario where product B is alongside product A on the shelf. At Numerious, we also love to level set with the current state, right? So you can see we start with what we call the today case, and only product A is available. Then we show what happens if product B replaces product A, or if product B is launched alongside product A. Because there's also a world where I want to be prepared to say, actually, don't launch product B at all, right? Go back to the drawing board because that's a terrible idea. So even if their concept was, do we keep product A when we launch product B, or do we just launch product B? I, as a strategic partner, want to be prepared to say, I actually don't think you should launch product B. Or maybe your plan for product B isn't super great. Here's how you could make it better, okay? Before I go on to the next slide, which will address the how you can make it better, a couple of other things that I really want to point out about this slide that I'll also talk about in that visualize pillar is that we are translating these results for our clients into business language. Our headline is very clear, right? Having both products on shelf optimizes share. And then we have some of those deeper callouts on the side, and we point them to how and where they can see these findings, right? The parentheses A, when product B replaced product A, it garners about 5% interest share. And then, well, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a little tiny A in that second column. And then the finding around point B and where we see that, and the finding around point C. And I also love including I'm not saying I'm the best at creating visuals. However, I think it's extremely valuable to have a how to read this chart box, because we know that sometimes our slides, or we hope that our slide is going to get pulled out and brought into a bigger deck that's going to sit on the CEO's desk, right? And so we need to make sure that the CEO has the context. So it's so important that anyone reading the slide can immediately grab it and understand the outcome. You can also see our footnote on the bottom left, which is going to point them to the full product specs, right? Not only is it going to say what is product B, what is product A, but it's also going to point them to how all of the other competitor SKUs are defined and their price points. So they'll have context, right? We're going to try to link them to any additional information that they're going to need to feel confident in the claim that we're making in our headline, okay? So I had mentioned I want to be prepared if I want to say, hey, actually don't launch product B at all, or if you do, here's how you can make it better. That is what I do, leveraging sensitivity analysis, okay? So especially if a client is in the development phase of the product, they still have a chance to make some tweaks and changes, right? They also really want to know which features are can't miss features, right? And so all of your resources need to make sure that that feature gets into the product before launch, right? And we do this with nice, easy to follow icons, okay? So we're taking product B and we're keeping the levels of product B the same and just changing one level at a time. And then we're plotting what the change in the share of preference would be. This is what we call sensitivity analysis, okay? And we're doing this in that competitive context. So if we were to go back one slide, we would see, product B gets 4.8% share when it is on shelf. And that is that dotted line that's going across. And so sometimes when I voice over this slide, I say to my client, you can blur your eyes. All you have to look at is where those biggest swings are from that dotted line. The biggest swings up are things you should consider adding to the product to drive share. And the things that go down are those can't miss features, okay? And when you work in the tech space, you know that things can come up, hiccups can happen. You can start to build something and all of a sudden you realize that it's gonna take 3 more developers and another year in order to get that feature functioning like we had talked about, okay? And so if you knew that dropping that feature from the roadmap had no impact on whether people bought product B, then you could be like, okay, let's not spend millions of dollars on devs and resources to make that feature. It doesn't really have an impact yet, right? It might in a couple years. But if your feature we're talking about is maybe attribute 8 here, and you're like, yeah, we don't need to do attribute 8, then I would go and say, oh, yes, you do, right? Because if you drop feature 8 from level 4 down to level 1, you will nearly cut your share or your interest for product B in half, okay? So you can see very clearly, we're calling out, attribute 9 has great potential to have a lift on product B, but if we don't hit, level 4 of attribute 9 or level 4 of attribute 8, we're gonna have a real problem on our hands in terms of driving people to purchase, okay? And then again, I have the how to read chart, and then I have the hyperlink to the full spec so that nobody, hopefully, takes this out of context. And then of course, one of the other primary business questions is probably when we launch product B, what should we price it at? And so by default, we're gonna have the price sensitivity, which is the blue line there for product B, and you can see the planned price at 4.8% is $139. And so we hold all the features constant and we just change the price. And obviously if we drop the price, more people would buy it, but does that really generate more revenue? And then maybe if our client has costing information, we could actually help them find the profit maximizing price point. And then I can be very clear in my headline to say product B could withstand a 10% increase to maximize profit. And then maybe I might have a follow-up that says with minimal impact on share, right? Because I think that is probably what's going to be most important to the business. And then of course my how to read and my link to the competitive set. So if you've done the job of simulating the business impact of different scenarios, you should be able to make claims that your stakeholder is going to immediately be able to act on, right? This is how product leaders think. And so this is how you should be framing up the results of your research, right? Make that bold claim. Launching this premium tier at $14.99 drives the most revenue while maintaining strong uptake, okay? Removing feature A would require a $7 discount to maintain the same interest. Replacing product A with B reduces total share. Keeping both on shelf optimizes portfolio performance. This is the language that your stakeholders speak, and you need to use the data to translate it into that language. Now, hopefully you saw through the simulation examples how important visualizing the results are. And again, I am not saying I am the best at creating visuals. I welcome any and all suggestions from those in the audience on how to prettify these even more. But in general, after presenting over hundreds of these slide decks, I found that simple, well-annotated visuals make or break understanding. So maybe your charts are prettier, but if your stakeholder can't consume what's on the slide in 5 seconds, they've already moved on, right? I want to make it as easy as possible for them to consume the takeaway that I'm trying to make them walk away with, right? So I lead with the answer. I highlight it right on the chart. I color code wins and losses, or I use those stop signs and those stars. If it takes you a minute to explain the chart, it's probably going to take the audience much longer to figure it out. Okay, so some high-level tips for clear visual storytelling. Lead with the headline, not the chart. Please don't put feature sensitivity in the big headline, right? Make the headline a takeaway. I also try to use only one chart per message. So if you need to show multiple things, spread them across slides. If you noticed, I have simulations, sensitivities, price curves, right? One chart per message. And then highlight the point with codes or call outs or asterisks, right? Whatever would be intuitive for your audience for the claim that you're trying to make. And I love those annotations, right? Then those brief notes to increase the speed in which your stakeholder can interpret what they're seeing, okay? If you make their job easier at consuming the data, you will have more time to spend on strategic recommendations, right? And I think everyone in this room wants to be more a part of the strategy and less about handing over data tables. But I don't want to speak for everybody. All right, finally, the last pillar is activate, right? I think I've kind of peppered this throughout, but I am a big proponent of making your recommendation boldly. Oftentimes at Numerious, we get hired because we are the third party in the room, right? We are the people that are there to interpret the data to allow you to make an informed decision that, we don't have buy-in either way. I am not going to get paid if product B launches or doesn't launch, right? I'm just going to get paid if you accept the research and think it was a good job and are able to make a decision from it, okay? So I don't have any sort of buy-in, right? So I should feel comfortable guiding the decision, providing options, right? But leading with a clear point of view and always including context for credibility. The more you've dug into the data and the more you feel confident in the result, then you should have that translate through what you're saying in the activation phase. Okay, so a couple of pro tips here. I know activate is technically the last of the 5 building blocks, but if you've noticed, it's not really like an order sequence, right? Because we're kind of weaving everything together. You have to have all 5 pillars firing on all cylinders to have a really successful conjoint deck, okay? So the activate piece is typically done kind of after we've done all of those pieces. But the minute that I come up with that activation recommendation, I'm going to put them as close to the title slide as possible in my full deck. Now, I know some people maybe like to save their key findings until the end, but I would challenge you on that, right? Why? I love telling my client, here's what my slide, sometimes we don't even make it past slide 3 in our presentations, and they're an hour long. And it's the title slide, and here's what we did, and here's what we saw. Literally 3 slides. And I love telling my client on that, TLDR slide, which I'll give you some examples here in a second, like, here's my findings. If you don't trust me, like, you can go see the remaining 40 pages of the deck to see how I got here. But trust me, and we can spend time talking about how these findings impact the business or the decision you were going to make, and spend time on that strategy, not on the statistics. Okay. So here's just one example of a TLDR slide for a client. If you're not using TLDR, which means too long, don't read, please start. Executive summary is like really old school. So not to date myself, but I started my career saying executive summary, and now I only say TLDR, right? Too long, don't read. If you don't have time to read anything else in this deck, all you got to do is read this one slide, right? And you get the gist, okay? So in this example, I've obviously unbranded it and changed some of the prices and the context, but this example and the next 2 that I'm going to show you are literally stripped from recent presentations. So on this one, it's very minimal and very clear. We try to keep to 3 themes and 3 themes only, because honestly, that's like all anybody can ever remember anyways. So let's just read through this one quickly. So the first claim, there is a strong appetite for a premium tier, and you, my client, should strongly consider launching one, right? I'm immediately addressing that we are aligned on the business question of if they should launch a premium tier. Then I say, the more value my client can squeeze into the premium offering, obviously the more users will be interested. But keeping the price at $14.99 would be ideal from both a revenue and interest standpoint. So this is how our team recommends optimizing that premium tier, right? Try to squeeze as much stuff as you can while still being profitable so that you can maximize both interest and revenue in the product, okay? And then the last point, while this data suggests a fully featured premium offering drives the most revenue, you should leverage internal costing information to make sure the optimal price point is set for profitability, as it may take many resources and time to build out a fully spec'd premium offering. So our client did not share with us costing information. And so I want to make it very clear that sure, the data says $14.99 is the right price point, but I don't really know if you can make that product that I want you to make for $14.99, right? I don't have that information, but you and your finance team or your pricing team or your forecasting team, whoever, should probably do a little more stress testing of our recommendation when you finally think about, resources and things involved. Okay. So that's one TLDR example. Here's another example. I like this one a lot because we have the 3 main themes at the top that address the client's business problem of should they move to a bundle strategy over an a la carte strategy. And then we have 3 bullets to support our 3 main takeaways. And what I also like about this TLDR is we are hyperlinking. So any place where you see an underline, you can click on that and it takes you directly to the slide with the supporting data, making the deck interactive. And it's like my proof point of, hey, let's go there, right? So like I mentioned, title slide, here's who we talked to, here's what we found. And if they're like, got it, Meg, there's, opportunity for us to grow among this audience. I believe you, bundles are a viable go-to-market strategy. Adoption will be maximized with tiered offerings. So tell me more about the tiered offerings. And so then I literally have to just click on the tiered offering hyperlink. And now we're on the slide and having a conversation about that, right? We don't need to go through the 30 slides that got me to the fact that I'm recommending a tiered offering. We can just pop over there and we can see what the recommended tiers look like and how that falls out and, have a conversation, right? Because the more conversations you can have, the more you'll be felt like you're a partner. It's just, +1 for making your presentations collaborative instead of a readout. Okay. And just one more here. Again, if you've got the deck, you'll be able to see all of these, but we've got the 3 main bullets on the left addressing the main business question. And then based on those 3 findings, we have a few other suggestions in terms of actions that the client could take to ensure in this one, they're trying to test whether or not they should launch product B. Okay. So hopefully you saw from those TLDR slides that it's important to take a strong stance, be direct, and encourage action to be taken based on the results, right? So, hey, launch at $14.99 to maximize revenue, or do not sunset product A. Product B launched alongside it, captures an additional group of the market without cannibalizing, etc., right? Because full circle moment, right? The best data means nothing if it doesn't inspire action. All right, in the last 5 minutes, I'm just going to take you through our typical deck outline to kind of nicely put a bow on this and package it together for you. So what does it look like to partner with Numerious and have a conjoint study that, delivers on all 5 of the pillars that we've been talking about for the last 40 minutes, okay? So this is our typical deck outline. I was not lying when I said title slide, research context, TLDR, right? Title slide, study overview, which is the key questions we set out to answer. Let me align everyone in the room on why we are here and what we're hoping to answer. And let me remind you who we talked to help us figure out the answer. Then we'll immediately share our findings to inspire action, because people are likely to pay attention at the beginning of a presentation. So you hit them with the good stuff in the beginning so that they stay until the end. So hopefully I hit you with enough good stuff at the beginning that most of you are still here. But imagine you're in this seat, you're presenting your conjoint results, you hit them with the TLDR, and they're really excited, and you don't even have to go into the rest of the slides, right? But if you do, or if you just want to hand over the deliverable, the next thing that we would do after we've inspired action is we'll ground them in their reality. So we'll do a quick view of the market landscape and how big the opportunity actually is, because when we run a conjoint study, there are other questions besides the conjoint, right? So usually we're going to include some sort of market sizing element if we can. Very, very simple to do if you're running a B2C study. A little bit harder if you're running B2B or need to use some sort of targeting. But I love, a great market landscape slide so that we can understand who we're talking to in our survey, how they fall out, what size of the total market they represent, right? Because all of those conjoint simulations are going to be relative to the size of the market that you talk to. So if you talk to the whole population, then 13% simulation share of preference is pretty good. But if you're talking to 2% of the population, 13% of the share of preference is teeny, tiny, right? And it's all relative, and they need to understand that baseline. So I love a good market landscape slide, or even just hey, we talked to these people and they represent this size of the market. So everything you're going to see in the conjoint is relative to these 10 million people, or whoever, or 30 million business decision makers. In addition to the landscape, we'll also likely have some slides on brand, the purchase funnel, right? Brand awareness, consideration, favorite, never buy, so that we can really level set the conjoint data, because conjoint, while wonderful, assumes 100% awareness of our product, equal marketing and sales efforts, all of the best things, right? And so conjoint results are typically best case scenario. And for some of our clients, the vast majority of consumers are aware of their brands, but for other clients, awareness is quite low. And so, they're only going to see those shares in the conjoint if they really put their money in marketing and sales. Okay, so we really like this kind of landscape to level set, what are the external factors that you also might be up against in order to, see the shares that you're going to see in the Conjoint results. Then we move right into those simulations so that I can connect, right? Here's the size of the market and here's what you're going to get, okay? And they can see the data behind those recommendations in the TLDR. I don't want to hide it any further than I have to. And you've seen this before, that high-level simulation story. And then I like to tell them, hey, what is influencing their decisions to buy or not buy product B, right? Because maybe they're surprised by how little share product B was getting, right? Or how much share that orange brand was getting. And we'll do that by looking at impact scores derived from the sensitivity analysis. And here, let's say we learn that, brand and price are the two most important things. And inevitably, we can't change our brand, right? So what can we change? Price. And therefore, we look at demand curves right away. So, hey, people are choosing based on this. If we can change our price for product B, here's how we should change it. And perhaps they're, particularly interested in that willingness to pay by customers versus prospects. So I'm going to show them, 2 demand curves with revenue behind it. And even better, if our client gave me costing information, I could make recommendations based on profitability. But sometimes we aren't able to change our price, or maybe we don't want to. So the next logical question is, if we can't change the price, what are our other options? So we show them a sensitivity analysis, right? And we have our call outs. Here's where you would see a lift with members, but not with prospects. Here's something that would be detrimental to drop. Please don't drop this, right? And my little how to reads and all the things. Hopefully you can start to see the storyline that's keeping your stakeholder engaged and giving them very clear direction on what they need to do when they walk out of this room, right? Just as an aside, you could also show that previous sensitivity chart as a willingness to pay chart. It effectively communicates the same thing if you've done the analysis the way we do the analysis, but it translates that data into shares, or that data into dollars instead of shares. Depending on my clients, I'm going to choose one and put it in the deck and maybe put the other one in the appendix, okay? They don't need to see 2 slides with 2 different numbers that effectively communicate the same thing. Then they get confused. Why does this say this and that say that, right? Let's just show them one, get the buy-in, and move on to the discussion, right? Hey, given what you saw, what do you think you're going to do next with the data? What are some other scenarios you might want to see? Is my recommendation for, revenue maximizing even possible? Or, are you not going to make any profit off of that, right? I might even bring up the simulator tool and we might war game. What if we did this? What if we did that? Right? Because sensitivity analysis is just changing one thing at a time, not 2. And maybe they want to add feature 4 and feature 5. And what does that do? Right? So I find having time for discussion and wargaming and collaboration allows you to become more of a strategic partner than just a vendor. And then just to show you, we always have an appendix. And in that appendix slide is probably just like our, standard, what Conjoint is, what Conjoint isn't, maybe the attributes and levels we tested, some screenshots of the exercise, any assumptions we made in the model or adjustments that we needed to make based on, awareness and distribution. And then maybe if my client requests them, I would put utilities in here, but they will be shown as distributions so that you can see the variation in the individuals, not just that one boring aggregate value, right? Because 1, lies are in the average, and 2, the whole reason we ran a hierarchical Bayesian multinomial logistic regression model is so that we could capture the heterogeneity of the individuals, right? So if we just show one number, that's so sad. Let's show the distribution. You can see here super clearly who's brand F. And why are people not on the same page with brand F, right? But who's brand C? And everybody, is kind of in the same opinion on brand C, right? Really, really interesting data. And look at the one ordered attribute, right? Which we can see that there's some people who really, really do not prefer 960p and really, really do prefer 4K, right? Maybe there's some interesting value in that. And maybe this is flagging to me I should do a clustering analysis, right? So stick those utility plots in the back, show the distributions, and you'll be better prepared for Conjoint. So What's next on your path to confident decision making? Well, hopefully you've seen how the right framework can transform your conjoint presentations from confusing to compelling, right? So now it's time for you to take that step. So this is just a little gut check cheat sheet to help you hold yourself accountable. After you run the deck, run through these questions. You feel confident checking each of these boxes, right? If you do, then you're probably really well prepared. And also, if you like what you've seen here, we're trying to do this across every quantitative methodology, and we're launching the Numerious Way, which isn't just about running better quant studies, but really becoming that go-to strategic partner. So we are launching that next month. If you click on that QR code, not only will you get the deck, but you could also register to become part of the waitlist. And if you're on the waitlist, we're going to do a founding 50 members, get 50% off the whole training module and some goodies and all that sort of stuff, but only if you sign up for the waitlist. So if you like the trainings that I give and you're curious to learn more, not just about Conjoint, but about all the quantitative methodologies, highly recommend you join the waitlist. And if not, just go grab the deck. And we've got about 8 minutes for questions. So Brian, come back. And I was ignoring the Q&A, so.
No, that's working as intended. We got to give a shout out to Keith. Keith heads up our consulting team here at Sawtooth. Just like Megan, a wonderful human, very willing to share and teach. Keith is a phenomenal teacher as well. We're very grateful that he's been helping out with the QA while things have been going on. We'll take a couple highlights from there. There was one question about depending on your audience, do you ever get a lot more technical? Are you going to lead with utilities because that's what they're expecting? Got any thoughts about that?
Well, what did Keith say? Or did Keith not answer that one?
Keith said, for example, in healthcare research, they're a lot more comfortable with statistics, and academic healthcare research were even more so, but still agreed with the whole alignment and storytelling being key things.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. I mean, definitely know your audience, right? And speak their language. But I definitely wouldn't assume that they want to see those things. I would almost move forward with, our storytelling deck and game plan. And then if at the end they say, oh, where's the utilities? Then you go to the appendix and you find them, right? Because there's just so many things that could go wrong in interpreting average utility scores. So I really, really try to stay away as much as possible. My happy medium is that I put the distributions in the appendix for my clients who ask for utilities.
okay. We did have some questions about doing those sensitivity charts. Maybe just to go over them one more time. The idea of a sensitivity analysis is kind of holding everything constant. So yeah, if you want to go back to your one of your slides, the idea here is that you've got a product mix in the scenario. So brand A has their products and B has their products and things like that. So there are typically other things being simulated here, but what we're doing is we're holding all of that constant and isolating the change. So for product B specifically, the second thing in the simulator, we're keeping everything else constant and we're shifting that product through its different levels to say, how much does this move the needle? Just this kind of one isolated change. Um, there are other ways. If you there was a question about doing this with multiple products. Curious if you have a thought on that. If a client is wanting to see something like this, but the goal has been two, three, four products, kind of all in the mix. Do you isolate them one at a time? Do you overlay sensitivities? Have you ever had to do anything like that?
Yes, and it is very difficult. And so when I have a lot of my clients are subscription based, right? And so we probably have three tiers: a basic, standard, and a premium. And they want to maximize or optimize all three of those tiers. And so we would never want to give the basic tier a feature that isn't in the standard and the premium tier, right? Or give the premium, like drop features from the premium tier that are in basic and standard. And so when we have those things, these standard reporting charts are going to look a little bit different, or we'll just set up rules in our sensitivity analysis and say like, hey, assuming that basic and standard are locked as they are today, here's what you could do to premium, and here's that, right? Or assuming basic and premium are locked, here's what you could do to standard, match premium on this, but drop down to basic on this. And then basic can go all the way up to standard, but nothing after that. And then once we've level set them on how they can improve based on where they're at today, then we might run our own, free-form analysis that says, I know that I need three tiers, and I know that one tier needs to be, they need to kind of stack in terms of price, but let everything else freely combine. And we'll run, loads of optimization searches to then come to the table with the Numerious recommended bundles. And that's really fun too, right? Because we are purely data driven. And so we don't have any sort of like customer usage information or how like premium the feature is from a resourcing perspective either. And so that can lend to like really interesting conversations where we stress the client of like, you sure that that's a premium feature? Like look at, what you could do if you put it in these other tiers and that sort of thing. So it also lends to like really exciting conversations. So my TLDR there is, yes, align on the business objectives and always answer your client's business questions, but do not be afraid to, push them a little bit further, right? Saying, don't launch product B at all. Or, hey, we ran this extra analysis that says that you could actually, completely change it up. Is that on the table? If so, here's like how you could improve share or how you could improve revenue or something of the kind. And again, that's just going to make you look like such a better partner at the end of the day.
Thanks. Yeah, we didn't we'll plug Sawtooth tools a little bit. We do have a nice simulator to automate these type of sensitivity things and also do the optimizations as well. So you can, for example, say, I would like these three products to balance both the goal of higher shares and higher revenue if you're getting some of that extra information and doing the addressable market sizing and all that sort of stuff. One interesting one, do you have any experience that certain categories replicate simulations to market share, replicate more or worse, depending on particular markets that you're researching?
That it's a really great question. I would love to have done a meta-analysis. We do a lot of work on conjoints very early on in like the product development phase. So oftentimes our recommendations aren't what actually gets brought to market, 3 or 4 years down the line. So hard to say if our projections, were good or bad or whatever, because we're really just trying to give signal on where they should spend their resources if it's a go, no go decision. However, we will always ask our client, what do we know about the landscape today? Like, what is your share of the market? Are you the leader? Who are your biggest competitors? And that way, if we go to simulate and our shares are very, very different from what they might expect to see, we can have a discussion around why they might be different. One, we might have just not included some very key attributes because we were trying to refine, one piece of the product, not the whole product. Or maybe we didn't incorporate, enough competitors or like the full landscape of both premium and sort of basic products and services. So there could be things in how we design the conjoint, which is why it doesn't map perfectly to market shares. But then we can, make some adjustments. If we know that your brand awareness, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to capture awareness, consideration, favorability in that upfront screener, then we can leverage that data at the individual level to say, hey, Brian, if this study is about smart speakers, you shop on Amazon, so you're going to be aware of the Amazon speakers, but you don't go in the store because you live in Chattanooga, an hour away from everything. So you're only online shopper. And therefore, maybe we would say, Brian isn't going to go into a store and therefore he can't buy from these brands that are in-store only products or something like that. So we can adjust our model if the goal is to get closer to market shares. But I don't know, from an industry perspective, if there are any like really easy wins with conjoint matching or any ones that are like big losers. I would say, depending on the research goal, will depend on how perfect we need our shares to match the market.
Cool. One more question here, specifically to Max Diff. The question said, I found that utilities can help explain the reach analysis, but would you suggest leading with the reach? So I'm guessing talking about doing turf and some optimal bundles, and still putting Max Diff utilities in the appendix.
Yeah, the hard part with utilities is that they're interval scaled, right? So at a minimum, with your max diff data, your utilities should match directionally, but I would always report more of like a rescaled score so that everybody's data kind of gets put on the same interpretable ratio scale. Versus showing raw utilities or even zero-centered utilities. So that would be my main suggestion, because you don't want someone to look at a utility of a 10 and say it's twice as good as a utility of a 5. You can't really say that because it's interval scale data. So get it on a ratio scale, and the storyline is the same. So nothing you've been doing in the past about, using max diff utilities in a report is bad. It's just you could slightly improve it for your audience and be a better storyteller if maybe you used a rescaled score, or if you did some anchoring and kind of put everything on a ratio scale.
With those ratio scaled utilities, would you still chuck them in the appendix, or would you show those at the beginning? Or it
Yeah,
depends.
I think it depends. I mean, max diff, my slides are the stack rank with the rescaled scores, so that I can say that an item with a score of a 10 is twice as good as an item with a score of a 5. Then I draw a couple of dotted lines between some tiers, and I say, this feature is in a tier of its own. These two features are in the second tier, right? And I kind of tell my story that way. And then I might run a turf analysis to say, if this is a messaging study, we need to say this thing that captures this group. Then we say this thing to capture that unique group. Then we say that thing. And then that's it in my deck. And then we discussed what they're going to do next. So, sure, I would probably put them in the appendix if I needed to put them anywhere.
Got it. I'm going to tweak this last question a little bit. Steve is asking, or is recommending that we should be looking at the variance based on the draws. This has been kind of a Sawtooth thing where we have our poor man's draws simulations with the randomized first choice that you can turn on. So I'm going to tweak it a little bit. If have you ever done any experimenting with simulations based on draws rather than just the kind of final point estimates before?
Yeah. Yeah, yes. I would love to only have simulators that are based on draws. They just become exorbitantly like large and very slow for my clients to use. So usually we're going to be okay with just using the point estimates that come out of the model. But I think to Steve's point, I mean, he's not wrong, and then that we would have a better understanding of the variation in the data if we had more data, and thus we could use the draws. But I, again, it would be an appendix slide for me as well. So
Yeah, it comes up often in internal discussions at Sawtooth about how neat it would be for us to build simulators on draws. So we appreciate that suggestion, Steve. I think that's going to do it for us today. So thanks again, Megan. For everyone else, reminders, you will get a link to the recording of this webinar. That will have the QR code. We also did put in the chat. We'll probably put on the webinar page a link to Numerious's website that'll have the opportunity to download these slides. And check us out, sawtooth.com/events for all our upcoming things. Thank you so much, Megan.
Thank you for having me, Brian. Thanks everybody for hanging in there.
We'll see you all
See ya.
next time.